Hey everyone, it's Josh here with your usual market update for April 2024. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the NAR settlement that you might have heard about in the news. So real quick, the NAR settlement really only says two things. It's actually pretty short in totality. One is buyer's compensation, that is compensation for buyer's agents, can no longer be listed on the MLS. So it's kind of a funny story. A couple years ago, there was a call for transparency, and the complaint was, there's not enough transparency. We don't know what these buyer's agents are making. You have to put it on MLS. And so they actually changed the rule. I think this was 3 or 4 years ago. It wasn't on MLS. Then it was required to be on MLS. And now, of course, it's required to not be on MLS. So if that tells you anything about where the thinking is on this, it's kind of all over the place. So what's best? Yeah, maybe you decide, but certainly it seems to be that the country at large doesn't know. So one thing is buyer's compensation not allowed to be in MLS. The second thing is agents must have a buyer's representation agreement that outlines the terms of their compensation when representing a buyer. So historically, as you know, if you list a home, you have a listing agreement with your broker, with your agent. You should also have a buyer's representation agreement every time you are buying a home. If you don't, I would say shame on your agent for not putting that in place. It's best practice, clarifies everything for everybody. It makes a ton of sense. But now it will be required by MLS, by the National Association of Realtors. So every time you enter into a conversation with an agent, they're going to try to get you to sign a buyer's rep agreement, and that's because of this settlement. So that's it in a nutshell, but the implications are a little bit more far and wide. I would say a few things to kind of summarize where this might go in the future. One is there will probably be fewer agents over time. So this will weed out some of the agents that don't know what to do, can't articulate their value. Maybe they don't have any value. They just got into this because it was easy to sell homes in 2022 or something like that, maybe post-COVID. So those agents that don't have a good understanding of what they can do, how they offer help to their clients, they're probably going to disappear. Which I think is a good thing for the rest of us who will be left, hopefully. There's going to be, unfortunately, some lack of clarity about buyer's agent commission. That means there's going to be lots of back and forth between agents. Probably won't affect you too much as a consumer, but it's going to be a little bit more confusing for us to know which houses do we show with the expectation of full compensation, which ones are we going to have to go to our buyers' clients and say, hey, this seller's not compensating us, and is going to lead to some of that back and forth. This is also going to present challenges for first-time home buyers. If you are a buyer and you want to be represented by an agent, and you are coming into a situation where the seller can't or won't compensate your agent, then there's a chance that you'll have to compensate your agent, which makes sense in a lot of ways. But if you're a first-time home buyer and you have $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 available, and that's just barely enough to cover your down payment, you're already asking for closing costs, or maybe you're going to a builder and the builder says, no, not helping you, then what do? You might be unrepresented. And that might be okay for some people, but that might really be scary for some people. I remember the first time I bought a home, I leaned very heavily on my agent. In fact, the first 2 times. It was after that second time that I personally got into real estate because it was interesting to me at the time. It still is, of course, interesting to me, but I do remember the fear of feeling like I have no idea what to do, and I really needed someone to help me out. So if first-time home buyers can't get access to that kind of help, that could be a difficulty going forward. We'll see. I don't know how that's going to shake out. But in general, I think more unrepresented buyers is probably likely to happen. I do expect personally to see that sellers will still offer compensation for their buyer's agents. I think it makes sense in the marketplace if you're going to say, hey, I want to sell this home, especially a more luxurious home, a higher price point home. That is going to require relationships. Relationships are the foundation of our business. So if you as a seller say, hey, Mr. Agent, I want you to represent me in the sale of my home, anybody that you know who brings us a buyer, another agent, we're going to compensate them for that. So that is a farther and wider net kind of situation. It makes sense. It might not be 3% every time. It might be 2 or 2.5. That remains to be seen how those get negotiated out. But I think the vast majority, probably 90, 95% of sellers are going to say, we'll offer something to that buyer's agent. Again, it might be 2, it might be 2.5. I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of 1% or less. Just knowing that the incentive for a seller is to get that home sold for top dollar. So that's my kind of thought on the NAR lawsuit in a nutshell. I'll just say, without sounding too much like a whiner, I think really the big winner here are the attorneys involved. And I know some of you are attorneys, so you might go, oh, how could that be? But look, there's a contingency here. So this attorney, Mark Ketchum, he's going to make like $100 million off this $450 million settlement. You do the math. You spread out what's left amongst all the class action plaintiffs, and it's a few $100s per plaintiff, right? So the homeowner gets a few $100, the attorney gets a few $100 million. I'll just leave it at that. Market dynamics. So I'm talking now about just kind of what's going on in the market here in April. I'm still seeing steady activity. You'll see in the newsletter, if you've read the newsletter, there's a lot going on. Buying, selling, it's still happening. And it's happening at a pretty good pace. We're seeing seasonality come back into the market. This is the time of year when things start to pick up, April, May, into the summer. And I'm seeing that in our own business. I'm seeing that in the Compass office and in just our market watches that we have set up for clients on different areas in Houston. There's a lot going on. So I think that's great. I'm happy to report that. Which means if you're thinking of making a move, it's probably as good a time as any, so long as your personal circumstances support that. I'll always say that personal factors are going to be more important than market dynamics. If you ask me, should you move? That's the answer I'll give you. You'll see in the newsletter that we had a listing come up, tons of interest, 17 showings, multiple offers. We sold that one right away. We also had a buyer who was interested in a property where there was a lot of interest. So we got in ahead of that, put in a full price offer, locked it up, negotiated repairs, got a great deal for my buyers on that. I'm only sharing that with you just so that you know this is kind of what's happening in our experience. So when I tell you that I hear things are going along, I have some personal experience to support that. Hopefully that means that you feel pretty good about whether you're going to stay put or going to move, that the bottom isn't going to fall out from under you, right? There's still a lot going on. And I think that's kind of in the back of people's mind when they think about interest rates and the election and all that stuff. You know, are we going to have this big crash? I'm not seeing it. I don't think the market dynamics, or market fundamentals rather, would support that either. As far as rates go, we're still kind of in that high sixes. I think 6.8 was the average for the day today. We are a little bit below the 30-year average, if that makes you feel any bit better. Probably not going to see 3 interest rate cuts like they were talking about earlier in the year. The Fed is, waffling on that. There might be 1 or 2 more. That might be okay given that we're headed into peak season. It could be too much, honestly, for the market to bear usual activity, pent-up demand, and lower interest rates. I think overall we're headed for a good summer. All right, that's my update in a nutshell. Hope you're doing well. Talk soon. Bye.